Okay, on number 1, it says to graph the inequalities, shade the region representing the solution of the systems. You're going to notice we've got 3x minus 4y is less than or equal to negative 12, x plus y is greater than or equal to 2, and x is less than or equal to 8. So we're going to go ahead and graph these, each one separately. So you notice that this first one here is a line. So the way I want to graph this line is I want to use the x and y intercepts. So this first point right here that I'm finding that relates to this, I'm going to let x equals 0, so that's going to be finding my y-intercept. You're going to notice that when x equals 0, that means that this right here is completely gone. Now I just have to go ahead and solve that equation. So I divide both sides by negative 4, and I get 3 for my y value. So there's my first value, 0 and 3. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my x-intercept. That's when I let y equals 0. So letting y equals 0, you can substitute that in there. Notice that just gets rid of all that. You can go ahead and solve that. Take negative 12 divided by 3, and you'll get this other point of negative 4. So there's my first set of points that I'm going to use for this first equation, 0 and 3, negative 4 and 0. Now this next line, I'm going to do the exact same thing to find the points with it. So I'm going to let x equal 0. So when I let x equal 0, notice that that's gone. Y is going to equal 2. Now to find my second pair of points, my x-intercept, I let y equal 0. Notice that gets rid of that, and so x can equal 2. So there's my second set of points. Now this third line right here, I just recognize that that is x is equal to 8. So remember, x is equal to 8. That is your vertical line. And one thing I also do notice is that all these are equal to. So that means that all my lines are going to be solid. Now if they weren't equal to, that would mean that they would be dotted. Now all I have to do is just go ahead and graph these. So to graph them, I go ahead and take my graph here. I'm going to go ahead and scroll this up a little bit. And I'm going to go to my first pair of points. So my first pair of points is 0, 3, negative 4, and 0. So here I go to 0, 3. I go to negative 4, 0. And here's my line that goes through those points. I go to my second line, 0, 2, 2, 0. So here I am at 0, 2, 2, 0. Again, since this is equal to, it's a solid line. And then with my third inequality here, I've got x is less than or equal to 8. So I go to this line over here at 8. And it's a vertical line. And it is also solid. Now that I've done that, I've got to figure out where to shade at. So there's the way that you want to shade this is, remember, the rule that we're going to use is I'm going to go ahead and solve for y. And when I solve for y, that means that my inequality is going to reflect where I'm going to be shading at. So as I look at this first one, though, as I solve for y, you notice there's this negative sign in front of it. So that means that's going to flip this inequality. So when it flips this inequality, that changes that to greater than or equal to. So since that changes that to greater than or equal to, that means that this first line that I have right here, that I drew, that means everything's going to be shaded above it. So I'm looking at this region right here, and this region right here, and then this region right up here. Now when I look at my second equation, you're going to notice that this doesn't have an 8 in front of it. So when I actually solve for it, it doesn't do anything to the inequality. And it says that y is greater than or equal to 2. So here's this line right here. And since everything's greater than that, that'd be this region or this region. Now as I look at this third region right here, x is less than or equal to 8. So here's my line at 8. And since that's less than, the lesser x's are to the left, so that means that this is going to be the region that I'm going to want to shade in. So I go ahead and shade that in, and there's my solution to that problem. So looking at this next one says sketch the graph the inequality. We've got x squared plus y squared is less than 25. As I look at this equation right here, I recognize this equation is the equation of a circle. Now if you want to, you can use the circle formula to sketch this graph, where h and k are your center, and your radius is equal to the square root of r. Now you're going to notice there is no shifts or movements. This is x squared, y squared is by itself. So that means that my center at x would be 0. My center at y would also be 0. And then my radius is going to be 5. The square root of 25, which is 5. Now that I have that information, I can go ahead and sketch my graph. So to sketch your graph, you go to the center, which is 0, 0. Now from here, I'm going to move in each direction 5. So I move right 5. I'm going to move left 5. I'm going to move up 5. And I'm going to move down 5. And now I just have to decide whether it's a solid or a dotted circle. I notice this is not equal to, so it's going to be a dotted circle. So I go ahead and make my dotted circle all the way around it. Now that I've done that, there's two ways that you can decide where to shade at. Notice this says that the circle is less than its radius. So just using that rule right there, that means the circle is less than its radius. That means I'd shade inside. Another way you can decide where to shade at is you can use these points from your center to decide if you're going to shade where your center is at. When I substitute those in, I get 0 squared plus 0 squared is less than 25. And I get 0 is less than 25. I ask myself, that's a true or false statement? Well, that is a true statement. So that means I shade where my center is at. So I shade on the inside. Now if it was a false statement, I would shade where my center isn't, and that would be on the outside. So that's what your graph looks like of number 2 of x squared plus y squared is less than 25. Moving on to problem number 3. So problem number 3 says that I have -2 is less than or equal to -2x plus 4, which is less than or equal to 6. It says it wants me to solve this inequality. So I'm going to solve for x in the middle, following the laws of algebra. So the first step that I'm going to do, you're going to notice is I'm going to go ahead and subtract 4 from all 3 parts of my inequality. When I do that, I get -2 minus 4 gives me this -6. Now I still have my -2x in the middle, and 6 minus 4 is going to equal 2. Now I need to go ahead and, solving for x, I need to divide everything by -2. So you're going to notice that I divide all 3 parts of my inequality by -2. And now, when I do that though, since I divided by negative, I have to flip my inequality. So -6 divided by -2 is 3. Here's my inequality, it flips. Here's this inequality, it also flips. And 2 divided by -2 is going to be -1. So make sure you flip the inequalities because you divide by negative. Don't forget that rule. And then we're going to go ahead and rewrite it so that the inequality would match a number line with the smaller number on the left and the larger number on the right. So you're going to notice as I rewrite this, I keep the inequalities the same. So this was x is greater than or equal to -1. So notice that looks like this. X was less than or equal to 3. It looks like that. I just switched it around just to make it look nice, because you should always write your inequalities and your interval notation as you're going from left to right as smaller to bigger. And so that is the answer to my inequality. Looking at problem number 4. Problem number 4 is to solve the system by the method of substitution. So the method of substitution, remember, is where you solve one of the equations for a variable. So solving one of the equations for a variable, I went ahead and decided to solve this second equation for my variable y. So when I do that, that means my x is going to move to the other side. And so that's going to leave me with now my new set of equations of x plus 2y equals -12. So the first equation stays the same. And now my second equation is y equals -x minus 7. Now that I've done that, using my substitution method, that means that I can take this y value of negative x minus 7 and substitute it in to my original equation, or my first equation of x plus 2y equals negative 12. So here I've done that. I've substituted that in. I've got x plus 2, and notice now I've got negative x minus 7. I put that in parentheses just to remind myself I'm going to have to use the distributive property to solve this equation. So be careful as you're doing your substitution. Make sure you put parentheses around what you're substituting in so that you remind yourself that you're going to have to use your distributive property. So now that I've done that, substitute in the other equation and solve for the variable. So I'm going to use my distributive property. Distributing this on through, I get negative 2x, and then distributing that on through, I get negative 14. Combining like terms, I'm going to take x minus 2x is going to give me that negative x. I still have my minus 14. Solving, I'm going to add 14 to both sides. So notice when I add 14 to both sides, that negative 12 plus 14 gives me the 2. That's negative 14 plus 14 is gone. I still have my negative x equals 2. Now I divide both sides by negative 1, and I end up with my x value of negative 2. Now that I know that my x value is equal to negative 2, I can substitute to find the value of the y variable. So I chose that second equation. So again, if you look up here, here was my two equations right here. X plus 2y equals negative 12 and y equals negative x minus 7. I can use either one to substitute that value of x into that equation to find my answer. So you can notice that x value is negative 2. I'm going to choose this equation to substitute it into. So when I choose that equation, I use it down here. Substituting in negative 2. So here's my equation, y equals negative x minus 7. I'm substituting my x for negative 2. So negative negative makes that a positive. So that's a positive 2. Subtract 7 gives me that y value of negative 5. So your solution to those on number 4 is going to be negative 2 and negative 5. On number 5, I've got a system, a 3x3 system. It says solve the system of linear equations using Gaussian elimination. So I've got x plus y plus z equals 4. I've got x minus 2y minus z equals 1. And 2x minus y minus 2z equals negative 1. So here are the rules for Gaussian elimination. So here's my rules. It says I'm going to go ahead and keep the first equation because it has a leading coefficient of 1. Now I'm going to eliminate the x variables in the next two equations. So here I've got my equation right here. So I've got my first equation, x plus y plus z all equals 4. I'm going to keep that equation. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply by negative 1, and I'm going to add it to the second equation. So here's my rule. I'm going to multiply the first equation by negative 1 and add to the second equation. This eliminates my x variable. So here's negative x, and I'm going to add this to this, and that gives me that 0, so there's nothing here. Now, when I take this negative 1 times my y, so that's negative y, and I add it to this right here, so negative y and negative 2y, so this gives me this one, which is negative 3y. I'm going to take negative 1 times 4. I get negative 4. I'm going to add that negative 4 to the 1, and that's going to give me this value down here, which is negative 3. So now I've got my two equations, and notice I'm putting this into row echelon form. So notice the x value right here is missing, so that's what makes this work. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply the first equation by negative 2 and add to the third equation. So I just wrote it again over here so you can see it a little bit better. And remember, I talked about how you can put a line through this part right here so you don't mix it up. But notice when I take this negative 2 times x and add it to this x right here, notice that that eliminates the x value. I'm going to take this negative 2 times my y, so I get negative 2y, and I add it to this. So negative 2y and negative y is going to give me my y value down here, which is negative 3y. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with my z's. So negative 2 times z is negative 2z. I add it to that negative 2z, and negative 2z and negative 2z is going to give me this z value, which is negative 4z. And now I just repeat the process. I've got negative 8, and now I'm going to add it to this negative 1, and this is going to give me that negative 9. So now notice I'm missing my x values all through here. So now I just have to go ahead and keep my first equation again. So here's my rules again. So you're going to keep the first and the second equation. So here's my first equation right here. Here's my second equation. Now I'm going to add those second and third equations together, eliminating the y variable. I just put it over here just so you can see it a little bit better. I realize in class we just went ahead and just did it all in the same step. I wrote it over here so you can see it a little bit better. So notice I'm going to have to multiply negative 1 to add that together. So negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3 plus negative 3 is 0. That's what gets rid of that. So now I've got 2z. When I add that, when I multiply by negative 1 times negative 2 is a positive 2. 2 and negative 4 gives me this negative 2z right here. This gives me that positive 3, and negative 9 is going to be negative 6. I divide both sides by negative 2 to get that last value. And let me scroll on up here so we can see that. So that gives me that value of z equals 3. Okay, now that you've done that, notice it's in row echelon form. Now we can back substitute to find the x and y values. So I'm going to go ahead and back substitute. So this 3 goes in place of z. Negative 2 times 3 is going to be negative 6. I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So negative 3 plus 6 is 3. Now I divide by negative 3, and that gives me my y value of negative 1. So I'm just kind of doing this all in my head. If you need to, write it out. We can write it out and see how that happens. Okay, now that I know that z is 3, y is negative 1. It's got negative 1 plus 3 is going to be our 2. And then I bring that to the other side. That's going to subtract 2. And that gives me my x value of 2. Now that I have my equation solved, I just go ahead and write it in order triplet. Remember, you put your x first, so it just goes in alphabetical order. So x is 2, y is negative 1, and z is 3. Problem number 6, the directions say solve the inequality. We've got 13/12 minus 1/4 x plus 11/12 is greater than or equal to 6x minus 5/4. The very first thing that you want to do is you want to get rid of your fraction. And to be able to do that, we're going to go ahead and multiply by the least common denominator. So you can notice, here's my denominators of 12, 4, 12, and 4. So the least common denominator is the smallest number that both 12 and 4 can go into. And so that number is going to be 12. So I'm going to multiply all of my terms by 12. So you're going to notice when I multiply this by the first one, the 12 is going to cross out. I'm just left with the 13. I multiply this 12 into the second term, and 12 divided by 1/4 is going to be 3x. When I multiply by 11/12 by 12, the 12's cross out. I'm just left with 11. 12 times 6 is going to give me that 72. And then 12 times 5/4. So remember 4 and 12, they reduce it down to 3, and 3 times 5 is going to be negative 15. Now that I've multiplied by the least common denominator, you're going to notice I have 13 minus 3x plus 11 is greater than or equal to 72x minus 15. Now I've just got an algebraic equation that I need to go ahead and just solve. So following my laws of algebra, I notice that first off, I take the 13 and the 11, that's going to add together and give me the 24. I still have my minus 3x, so combining like terms, and that's still going to equal or be greater than or equal to 72x minus 15. So solving this, I'm going to go ahead and subtract 24 from both sides and subtract 72 from both sides. And when I do that, you're going to notice a negative 3x, negative 72x can give me that negative 75x. That's greater than or equal to, and I got negative 15, negative 24 is going to give me that, negative 39. Dividing both sides by negative 75, I get negative 39 all over negative 75, which is positive 39/75. And you want to make sure and flip that inequality, because every time you multiply or divide by a negative, you flip your inequality. So your answer is going to be x is less than or equal to, and I'm going to go ahead and simplify to 39/75 down. So dividing both the top, the numerator, and the denominator by 3. Following my laws of fraction, so 39 divided by 3 is 13. 75 divided by 3 is going to be 25. So there's your answer for number 6. This x is less than or equal to 13/25. So your answer is going to be D. The answer is none of these. Okay, number 7. Let's go ahead and scroll up and take a look at our problem on number 7. On number 7, it says we have negative 2x plus 2y minus z equals 21. 9y plus 5z all equals 86. And z is going to equal 1. You're going to notice that this problem right here is in what's called row echelon form. Now to solve row echelon form, you're going to use back substitution. So using the back substitution, I'm going to take this 1 and put it into my equation. So I write it down right here, and I'm going to go ahead and solve for y. So after substituting in the 1, solving for my y, I got 9y, and remember my z was equal to 1. So I got 9y plus 5 all equals 86. I subtract 5 from both sides, I get 9y equals 81. I divide by 9 and I get y equals 9. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and start to fill this in. So now I have z equals 1, z equals 1, y equals 9, x equals negative 2. So going back to my original equation, the very first equation, which is negative 2x plus 2y minus z equals 21. Now I'm going to substitute in my z in place of 1 in place of my z. And then I've got 9, and substitute that in place of y. And so you're going to notice, writing my equation down here, I now have negative 2x plus 2 times 9 minus 1 all equals 21. I just need to go ahead and solve this equation. So solving this equation, I take 2 times 9, and I get 18. I still have my minus 1, I still have my negative 2x, and that all equals 21. Combining my like terms, so I got 18 minus 1 gives me the 17. Go ahead and subtract 17 from both sides. So 21 minus 17 gives me the 4. So I have negative 2x all equals 4. I divide both sides by negative 2. And I get x is equal to negative 2. So there's my ordered triplet that satisfies all three of those equations. So here's my x equals negative 2. So now I go ahead and write it in alphabetical order. So here's my x of negative 2, my y is equal to 9, and my z equals 1. And that would be your solution to number 7. Would be the ordered pair of negative 2, 9, and 1. On this next problem, on number 8, number 8 says we've got 3x plus y equals, 3x plus 9y equals 30, and x minus 2y all equals negative 10. The directions say to solve the system graphically. So to solve this system graphically, you're going to solve for y on both equations. So notice, I'm going to take this 3x and move it over next to my 30. So I got 9y equals negative 3x plus 30. And I'm going to take this x and this one and move it over next to my 10. So I have negative 2y all equals x minus 10. So to be able to graph this, I have to solve each equation for y. So now I'm going to divide everything by 9. So dividing by 9, I get this equation, y equals negative 3/9 x plus 30/9. I reduce down the negative 3/9 to negative 1/3 x plus 30/9. Now in this problem here, I'm going to divide everything by negative 2. And when I solve that, I get y, and that becomes a 1/2 x plus 5. So now I'm going to go ahead and graph this in my calculator and use that intersection feature of the calculator to find the solution. So using my calculator, Can go ahead and substitute this equation into my calculator. Let's see if I can move my calculator over. And, well, maybe I'll just scroll down and take a look and see what those two equations are. So here's my equation. So take your calculator, go to y equals, and this first equation, I'll just show you real quick, was negative 1/3 x plus 30/9. So that's what I'm going to type into my calculator. So I've got negative 1/3. So clear out anything that's in your calculator. Make sure you put parentheses around your fraction. So I've got negative 1/3. And then I've got x. And I've got plus. Now make sure you put parentheses around your 30/9. There's my first equation. Now my second equation, type in and put parentheses around 1/2. And then we have our x plus 5. When you're done doing that, hit zoom and then hit 6 for zoom standard because other people use these calculators. And now you'll notice that their solution is going to be at that intersection right here. So it's going to be right here. If I look right there, it's kind of hard to see exactly where that is at. It looks like it may be negative 2 and maybe 4. But to actually check, use your calculator to find that answer. So to use your calculator, you go to second function, then you hit your calculate, and notice number 5 stands for intersection. So you hit number 5, and it's going to ask you the first curve you want. And so then you just hit enter. The second curve, you hit enter, and then you hit enter again, and it finds that answer for you. And it looked like that was what the answer was going to be. So notice now it's exactly blinking on it. And so that answer is negative 2 and 4. So that would be your solution to that system, would be negative 2 and 4. Looking at number 9, it says to solve the inequality. So we've got our inequality of x squared minus 2x is greater than 8. So this is a quadratic inequality. So remember your first step on a quadratic inequality, you're going to factor it. Well, to be able to factor this, I'm going to have to move that 8 over. So when I factor this, I get this equation, x squared minus 2x minus 8 is greater than 0. So now I factor this to x minus 4 times x plus 2 is greater than 0. So I find my zeros, which is x equals 4 and x equals negative 2. So once you find your solutions, you're going to set up your intervals from negative infinity to positive infinity. And setting up from negative infinity to positive infinity, you're going from left to right, so smallest to biggest. So I start off with negative infinity, and I go to negative 2. And notice they're both parentheses since this is not equal to. And I go from negative 2 to 4, and I go from 4 to infinity. So I just choose some points in each one of my intervals, and I'm going to test to see whether they're positive or negative. Because this wants to know when the inequality is greater than 0 or when it's positive. So notice this is asking us, when is this equation greater than 0? Or in other words, when is it positive? So each interval has its own positive or negative. So I'm going to choose x equals negative 3. I'm going to substitute that into this equation here. So I've got negative 3 minus 4 is going to be negative 7. Negative 3 plus 2 is going to be negative 1. And a negative 7 times a negative 1 ends up being a positive 7. So that means in this interval, every single number that I choose in that interval is going to be positive. So now I choose another point in my next interval. So between negative 2 and 4 is 0. So now I'm going to substitute in 0 into my two equations here. So that's 0 minus 4 is negative 4. 0 plus 2 is 2. I multiply those together. Negative 4 times negative 2 is going to be a negative 8. So since that is negative, that means that all the intervals between, or all the numbers between negative 2 and 4 will give me an answer that is negative. Okay, between 4 and infinity, choose another number, 5. I'm going to substitute this number into my equation. So I got 5 minus 4 is going to be 1. 5 plus 2 is 7. So 1 times 7 is equal to 7. So notice that is positive, so that means that all the answers in this interval are going to be positive. Now that I know what each one of my intervals are, I'm going to go ahead and check again. This wants to know when this equation is greater than 0, so it wants to know when it's positive. So I notice it's positive here and here. So these would be my two answers. So negative infinity, negative 2, and 4 to infinity. And notice a lot of times you'll see this little symbol right here. It's called a union symbol. It just means and. So we're finding the intervals that are positive. So negative infinity, negative 2, union 4 to infinity, or and. Okay, on this next problem on number 10, it says identify the graph of the inequality. In other words, it just wants you to sketch the graph of this inequality. So to do this, it's already solved for y, which is following the slope-intercept form. So remember, here's your slope, here's your y-intercept. So to graph this, I go to my y-intercept, which is a negative 6, put a dot there. And then my slope is 6, and remember that's over 1, that's a fraction. So from my y-intercept, which is right here, 0, negative 6, I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1. Put another dot there. I check to see if it's dotted or solid. It's equal to, so that's going to be a solid line. And then it says y is less than that. So your lesser y's are below that line. And so that's what your graph will look like on number 10. On number 11, it says I've got two equations. 2x minus 2y is equal to negative 12. 3x plus 2y equals 7. It says solve the system by elimination. In other words, I'm going to add them together. I notice I don't have to multiply by anything because I do have this negative 2y and 2y. All I have to do is just add it together. So adding this together, I've got 2x plus 3x is going to give me the 5x. This gives me 0, so that's what makes this work. And then this, negative 12 and 7, is going to give me negative 5. I divide both sides by 5, and I get x is equal to negative 1. Once I know that x is equal to negative 1, I'm going to substitute it into my first equation and solve it. So here I've got my first equation. I put negative 1 in place of x. So I've got 2 times negative 1 minus 2y equals negative 12. So solving this out, I get negative 2. When I take 2 times negative 1, I still have my minus 2y equals negative 12. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. When I add 2 to both sides, that gives me negative 2y is equal to negative 10. I'll scroll this up here so we can go ahead and divide both sides by negative 2. And negative 10 divided by negative 2 is going to give me my value of y, which is 5. So here's my ordered pair, negative 1 and 5. That is the solution to that system of equations. On this next one, on number 12, I've got two equations. It says y minus 2x is all going to equal 6. And I also have my second equation, which is x squared plus y squared equals 36. And it says solve the system by the method of substitution. So solving this by the method of substitution, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and solve my equation for y. So here's my first equation right here. I'm going to solve it for y. I get y equals 6 plus 2x. I'm going to substitute that into my second equation. So now I have x squared plus 6 plus 2x, all squared, all equals 36. Now as a reminder, 6 plus 2x squared means I have 6 plus 2x times 6 plus 2x. So I do have to FOIL this, first outside, inside, last, to solve it. So notice here's my first, it's 36. My outsides is 12x, my inside is 12x, which gives me that 24x. And then my two lasts, my 2x gives me that 4x squared. So now my equation is x squared plus 36 plus 24x plus 4x squared all equals 36. I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms. So to combine your like terms, I've got x squared, 4x squared, add those two together and you get 5x squared. I still have my 24x, I still have my 36, and that all equals 36. So now I subtract 36 from both sides. And I get 5x squared plus 24x all equals 0. I'm going to factor this. Now the only thing that I can factor out of this, remember, it doesn't factor two binomials, it only factors the common factor, which is x. So I'm going to take an x out of both sides. I write it out front, and then I put in my parentheses. So 5x squared divided by x gives me that 5x. 24x divided by x gives me that 24. So now that I've factored it, here's my factors. I got x times 5x plus 24 all equals 0. So now I'm going to set each factor equal to 0, and I'm going to solve. So here's my factors. So here's this first factor of x. I set it's equal to 0 and solved. Of course, it already is solved. So now I've got 5x plus 24. I set that equal to 0. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract 24 from both sides. I get 5x all equals negative 24. I divide by 5. I got x equals negative 24/5. So now to find the value of y that goes with those two answers, I just remember my equation that I had before. I had this equation right here of 6 plus 2x. So I'm going to do this first one of 0. So notice when I substitute in 0, let me scroll this down just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So when I substitute in my 0 into this equation right here, so here's my 0 goes into this equation. I wrote it down right here, so I got y equals 6 plus 2 times 0. Of course, 2 times 0 is just 0, and 6 plus 0 is 6. So there's one of my solutions, 0 and 6. Now to find my other solution, I'm going to substitute in negative 24/5 in place of my x, and I get y equals 6 plus 2 times negative 24/5. Following my laws of fractions, I multiply numerator by numerator. That gives me the negative 48. Denominator by denominator, that's 5 times 1, which is 5. Finding a common denominator, 6 over 1. So that's going to give me 30/5. So I got 30/5 plus negative 48/5. I add my numerator and keep the same denominator. 30 plus negative 48 is going to be negative 18. And I keep my same denominator, which is 5. So there's that ordered pair, negative 24/5 and negative 18/5. That would also work in the equation. So your answer is 0, 6, and negative 24/5 and negative 18/5. Okay, on this next problem, on number 13, it says we have the story problem. The story problem says Leslie and Gilbert drove a total of 175 miles in 3.8 hours. Leslie drove the first part of the trip and averaged 55 miles per hour. Gilbert drove the remainder of the trip and averaged 35 miles per hour. For what length of time did Leslie drive? So you're going to write two equations that represent this information. So I just decided to have x equal Leslie and y equal Gilbert. So if you're going to notice, if I add them together, x plus y, that's going to equal the 3.8 hours that they're driving. So it looks like Leslie was driving 55 miles per hour and Gilbert was driving 35 miles per hour. So if I take 55x plus 35y, that's going to equal the total miles that they drove, which is 175. Now if you want to use that method that I talked about for checking to see if these are correct, you're going to notice that in this first one, this is the smaller number, smaller number, smaller number, bigger number, bigger number, and bigger number. That's how I know that I wrote my equations correctly. Now I go ahead and use the substitution method. So the substitution method, and you can use the elimination method if you want. I chose the substitution method. So I'm going to go ahead and solve this equation right here for y. So I get y equals 3.8 minus x. So now that I've solved that for y, I'm going to substitute it into my second equation. And when I do that, I get 55x plus 35 times 3.8 minus x all equals 175. Now distribute that 35 on through, so 35 times 3.8 is 133. 35 times negative x is going to give us that, negative 35x, and that all still equals 175. Continuing, I'm going to combine my like terms. So I've got 55x and negative 35x. Combine those together, that gives you 20x. I'm going to take this 133 and subtract it from 175. And when I do that, I get a total of 42. Now I'm going to divide both sides by 20. And that gives me x is 2.1. So if x is 2.1, and I look at my original equation, so I know that this original equation is x plus y equals 3.8. And when I solved it, I got this y equals 3.8 minus x. I'm going to substitute in that 2.1 in place of my x to find my y value. So scrolling down here, find my y value, and I get 1.7. So notice Leslie drove 2.1 hours and Gilbert drove 1.7 hours. And the question is, for what length of time did Leslie drive? So that answer would be C, which is 2.1. So number 13, your answer is C. Number 14, it says solve the inequality and give the solution in interval notation. So we've got a rational function here. We've got x minus 7 times x plus 5 all over x minus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. So since this is already in factored form, I just need to write the solutions. So here's the solution of x minus 7. That gives me a solution of 7. The solution to x plus 5 is negative 5. And the solution to x minus 3 is going to be 3. Now that I have my solutions, the next thing I need to do is set up my intervals from negative infinity to positive infinity. So here's negative infinity to negative 5. That's my smallest x value. And notice since this is equal to, I use a bracket right here. Now my next biggest one is 3. So here's my 3 right here, so from negative 5 to 3. But notice since 3 is in the denominator, I still, even though it says equal to, I still can't equal that 3 because that's a division by 0. So that means that I'm going to use a parenthesis here. Then I go from parenthesis 3 to 7. Well, 7's up here, so it can't equal that. And it's also equal to, so I need a bracket. And then bracket 7 to infinity. So now that I've set up my intervals, I'm just going to choose a value in each of these intervals to see whether they are positive or negative. So notice, let's see if I can scroll it down here so everybody can see. I'm going to go ahead and choose this negative 6. That's in this interval between negative infinity and negative 5. I'm going to substitute it into this equation right here, into all 3 of them, and see whether it's positive or negative. So negative 6 minus 7, that's going to be a negative 13. So I just need the sign. So that's negative. Negative 6 plus 5 is also negative. And negative 6 minus 3 is also negative. So I've got a negative times a negative, and then I'm going to divide by negative. So negative times negative is a positive, and a positive divided by a negative. So that interval is going to be negative. When I substitute in 0 into all 3 equations, you're going to notice this is negative, this is positive, and this is negative. So negative times a positive divided by negative. So this interval right here is going to be positive. So from 3 to 7, I go ahead and substitute in that 4 into my equations. So substituting in 4, so this is negative, this is positive, and this is positive. So negative times positive, negative divided by positive is a negative. So right now I have negative, positive, negative. Now when I choose that 8, I substitute it in. Notice that makes this a positive, that stays positive, that stays positive, and so that is going to be positive. So now I just have to identify which intervals I'm looking for. So this, notice it says it wants to know when this equation is greater than or equal to 0. So that means it wants to know when it is positive, or what on intervals it is positive. So it looks like we'll scroll down a little bit here and find out where it's positive at. So remember my intervals when I found them. This one was negative, this one is positive, this one is negative, and this one is positive. So the answers that I'm looking for are those answers that are positive. And so my two answers, so my two answers looks like they're positive here and they're positive here. So that would be your two solutions that they're both positive on. So your answers would be those two intervals of -5 to 3 union 7 to infinity. Okay, problem number 15. The problem says it wants to know, it says which of the following intervals represents -3 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 4. So as a reminder, with your intervals, you've got your brackets are used with your less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. Your parentheses is used with less than or greater than. So since these are both equal to, going from left to right, you keep your -3, you keep your 4, and they're both brackets. So it looks like that answer matches up with C. On number 16, it says solve the system by the method of substitution. So we got y equals x squared minus x minus 6 for our first equation. We have y equals x squared plus 4 for our second equation. Both equations are already solved for y. It is just a matter of actually substituting into the other equation. So since this is solved for y, I'm just going to substitute that in place of y. I end up with the equation x squared plus 4 all equals x squared minus x minus 6. Now that I've substituted that in, I'm just going to solve for x. So solve for x. I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides. And when I subtract x squared from both sides, that becomes 0. There is no x squared left. So I'll just cross out. I'm left with 4, all equals -x minus 6. Now I just need to go ahead and add 6 to both sides. So I got 4 plus 6 is going to equal 10. I got 10 all equals -x. So now that I know that 10 equals -x, just divide both sides by -1. So dividing both sides by -1, I end up with x equals -10. So that would be my value of x is equal to -10. Now to find my y value, I can substitute it into either equation. And it looks like the equation I chose to substitute it into is the second equation, which is y equals x squared plus 4. So substituting in x squared plus 4, in place of x, I'm going to put in my -10. Substituting that in, go ahead and square that -10. So -10 squared is going to be 100, and 100 plus 4 is going to be 104. My solution to number 16 would be x is -10, y is 104, right is an ordered pair of -10 and 104. On this last problem, the story problem, it says Mrs. Garcia invests a total of $7,088 in two savings accounts. One account yields 7% simple interest and the other 7.5% simple interest. She would like to find the amount placed in each account if a total of $503.69 in interest is received after 1 year. So you're going to notice that, first off, we don't know what the two accounts are. So we're just going to go ahead and choose a variable to represent each account. So I just chose x and y. Those are easy variables to work with. So I've got x plus y equals 7,088. And now it says on the information that my first account has 7% interest. Make sure you change that to a decimal. 7% is 0.07. And then my second account, 7.5% interest. So change that to a decimal, which is 0.075. And that's going to have a total interest of $503.69. So you can go ahead and use that method that I talked about to check to make sure it's correct. So I've got the bigger number here, which is 1, 1, and bigger number. Notice this is smaller number, smaller number, smaller number. That's one way I can check to see if I set it up correctly. That's an easy method to use. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and use the substitution method. So I'm going to take this first equation right here. I'm going to solve for y. And I get y equals 7,088 minus x. Now that I know that y equals 7,088 minus x, I'm going to substitute it in place of y into my second equation. And I get 0.07x plus 0.075 times 7,088 minus x. That all equals $503.69. I'm going to go ahead and distribute my 0.075 on through. So 0.075 times 7,088 is $531.60. And when I multiply 0.075 times negative x, I get this, negative 0.075x. Combine your like terms. So that's 0.07x, negative 0.075x. I combine those together. I get negative 0.005x. And I still have my $531.60. And that still equals my 503.69. So now I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 531 from both sides. So when I subtract $531.60 from both sides, so I take 503 minus 531.6, I end up with negative 27.91. So I have negative 0.005x, all equals negative 27.9191 divided by negative 0.05, negative 0.005, and I end up with my answer of 5,582. So notice that is the x value, so that's what it's going to be, is 5,582 at 7%. So now to find the y value that goes with that, I can go ahead and substitute that into this equation right here. So substituting 5,582, so I take 7,088 minus 5,582, and that gives me the answer to my second equation, which is 1,506. So there's my two answers. So I've got 5,582 for my x, which was at 7%. I've got 1,506 at 7.5% for my y values. And that will be your answer to that question.